But they get it.
Somebody else grades
they get credit
them.
for the capstone.
Yes, they get credit, but it's either, Professor Eldrebary, he has like about 250 students a semester now doing this. So I don't think he actually grades them all either. There's a series of intermediaries that actually grade them. And it's based not just on my feedback, but on the other things they've done in the capstone as well.
Right. So there's specific aims that are decided upon before you.
Yes.
And that works in it. And I was also curious about any other funding, like external sources. It seems that you've put a lot of energy.
I haven't sought it because that's like one more thing that I don't really know. Okay, this is the field of history. And historians are somewhat, I don't know, protective of their field. And they don't want to see, they're certainly not going to give money to outsiders coming in. How much time I just do things, and if it's free, it works.
Either the NEH or NSF has a Digital Humanities.
Yeah.
NEH does. NEH does.
Yeah.
NEH does, but this is not, this would be funded under Digital Humanities, this would be funded under digitization. They have a separate category now for it.
The application is available November 15th. 2 weeks.
Yeah, you still have time.
No. Yeah.
I'm actually curious about how you define, because you say this is actual history, this is like that historians, but how do you define your role in this? What attracted you to this project? Why do you want that kind of stuff?
It's writing also. And I came here as a technical writer, and this is technical writing. And the judges at that point in time were actually sitting at the bench, and they were writing down everything that happened in the courtroom according to a specific set of expectations that they had. And it ends up telling the story of what went on in that courtroom. So you can actually, it's almost like you're there. When you're reading this stuff that has never been read by anybody else, it's almost like you're sitting in the courtroom there and you can see what's going on. So that was my viewpoint, is that this stuff was too good to let it just deteriorate and then never be seen by anyone. I wanted to make it available to people.
It's a fascinating project.
Yeah.
But there was shorthand as well, right?
Yes, that was what introduced me to the
Yeah.
project.
So this was a shorthand that you didn't know before,
Right.
and I'm just wondering a couple of hopefully related things. Like, I could imagine that there's such a thing as a legal shorthand, a certain system.
Yes.
Okay, is that the case?
Well, there isn't one particular legal system, but lawyers used it all the time, and they used different systems.
Okay.
It was something that lawyers used.
So my second question is sort of bifurcated. One is this particularly, do you think, now I'm asking you as the historian here, so is this particularly, would you say, some kind of British proclivity? Like if you looked at later court notes, records, would you see Indian justices carrying on in this sort of Monty Python-esque way, perhaps, or something? And B, if they were using shorthand, was it the same shorthand, or?
I don't think, I'm sure they did use shorthand, but it would be a completely different form of shorthand, and they had a tendency to have very, very long legal documents. So the reason that the British people used the shorthand in court a lot was partially to condense what was being said and written so that it would fit in notebooks, and partially for secrecy. But they were the first to use shorthand. There was no first to use shorthand. It goes way, way back. It goes back to the beginning of writing, really. But they were the first to use it fairly frequently, and I think a lot of that was for security and letter writing, so that they could send letters to other people and nobody could read what the letters said.
But this is not shorthand, but if you look at like very old, like medieval, early medieval, like mid-medieval whatever, you see a lot of abbreviations. Where they're not trying to hide anything, just everybody knows. It's
Yeah.
just trying to, because vellum would be expensive.
Right. That's another form of shorthand.
Yeah, so is there any connection that you see between that and later, more modern?
Yes, yes. Well, but this gets off into my other topic, the one that I had to set aside. I didn't say that. The history of shorthand was more fun. And that's the project that I set aside in order to do this project. But it really does go way, way back to the beginning of writing. They've identified it in medieval paintings, and the Romans used it. And if I were to write about it, I wouldn't pick it up until it was in the English language, and probably like, you know, in the 1640s or something. And then it changed completely in the 19th century, and that's when prior to that, they were using it for security, for the most part. But later in the 19th century, they were able to keep up with the spoken word, and they were able to take down entire speeches as people gave them, and that was a game changer. And then in the 20th century, it changed completely again and became a business tool. And by then, they had finally gotten down to, like, you know, two main systems of shorthand, Pittman and Gregg. But prior to that, there were hundreds of systems, and everybody used a different system. But that's not on this topic, and I shouldn't talk about it. Yeah?
I was just really curious, thinking about disciplinarity when you referred to these legal journals as technical writing. Would you call all legal writing technical writing then, or just?
Probably. It's a form of technical writing.
Okay, well then I have then taught technical
Yeah.
writing. and practiced it. Yay, okay.
I mean, it's my opinion, but, you know, it's not technical and like this is how this, you know, computer science program works, or this is how this machine works, but it's structured, and it's like a proposal, like a grant proposal. You have to write it a certain way, and if you don't write it a certain way, it's not gonna fly. And I don't know how to write grant proposals, so, okay.
Recipe, just give them what they asked you for, very specific.
Yeah. Okay, well, in conclusion, I put in several samples of handwriting just so that you could see what because I feel I got to know the people via their handwriting and how their moods changed and stuff. Since I looked at all of these pictures, all 22,519 of them, probably about 6 or 7 times going through each folder. This is Hyde. Hyde was clear. He's easily understandable. He's such a pleasure. And he wrote about the other people in the court. So he's always got this running sort of narrative of what's going on in the court in general, which is really interesting. And he can be funny, too. He can be really funny. And then there's Chambers, and Chambers is more of a problem. That's pretty good handwriting right there. I know it doesn't look like it. Yes, that's coming through from the other side.
The angles are all.
That, you know, every page is different. There were times they didn't have blotting paper, so it's all like blots all over the place. And Andrew Otis was able to transcribe that stuff. He did a really good job, which is why we have to have those transcriptions there. And then this is Sir William Jones's handwriting, the philologist. He liked underlining things for some reason. I don't know why. But like I say, he died there. He was not... sometimes judges would come, like the judge that came to replace him came and then like lasted 1 month and died. And then it would take like 6 months to get a new one. And then there's also some scribal handwriting, and there's documents that are pasted in, there's documents, there's notes, there's letters that are just stuffed into the notebooks.
That looks like nice.
Yeah, this is scribal, yeah. And then this is I was going to talk about this one case, but I have a feeling I've gone on for a while, so I think I'm going to stop. Okay, this one case here, this is where suddenly in 1785 the number of pages spikes. It was a case of an Englishman, Stuart, I think it was Humphrey Stuart, Rex versus Humphrey Stuart. Rex is the king. The king versus Humphrey Stuart. Humphrey Stuart had gone on a hunting trip in the Bihar, and because he didn't have quite enough servants, he borrowed other people's servants from the local landowners, and he killed a boar, and he went to his cook and he said, "Cook this boar for me." And the cook said, "I can't, the boy just ran away." And so I guess they had a boy working in the kitchen who had run away. So Humphrey Stewart blamed the chowkidar. The chowkidar is a watchman who had been employed by, he'd been borrowed from another employer, and tied him to a tree and had the other servants beat him, hoping that he would confess as to where the boy was. He never did confess, and when the other servants didn't beat him hard enough, he took the bamboo and he demonstrated beating him harder in the best English public school fashion. And the beating continued all day, and eventually the guy died. And so it was brought into court, and this was a very important case because it was an Englishman being tried for murder. And this is at the point where Chambers was at 1785. This was at the point where Chambers was about to become the Chief Justice. And so he was running this case, and they probably took about 600 pages of transcription. The trial went on for a day and a half, and they didn't ever stop. They sat there the whole time, writing the whole time. They would spell each other. They'd get up and walk away for a while and come back, but they kept going. They had a jury sitting there. And they went through it, and finally at the end, Sir William Jones wrote this chart here for Chambers to give to the jury on whether or not to convict of murder or manslaughter. And they convicted him of manslaughter instead of murder, and he was burnt on the hand. And after that, Chambers did become the Chief Justice, and he continues writing in the notebooks for the most part. So it's his hand that becomes dominant after this.
For manslaughter is burning your hand?
Yeah, at that time, yeah.
What does that mean?
What's the
Just a
punishment?
little bit, or?
What was the punishment?
I don't know.
What was the punishment for murder?
Cigarette.
Hanging. Yeah. Yeah. So that's one. Another thing that was interesting about this is that when you read the accounts of the criminal trials, the civil trials can be very boring and have a lot about money and mounds of rice and who took what when. But the criminal trials can be very interesting, and you actually, because they didn't have lawyers then for the criminal court, they had witnesses. So witnesses would come in one after another, like Rashomon, and give their versions of what happened. And at the end, the jury would decide, as guided by the judges. So you actually hear all sorts of stories of stuff that happened. And that's another reason I wanted to do this. It was just like really interesting. It's like it's time travel. Yeah. Okay, and that's it. So thank you very much.
Any more questions? I know we've been peppering her while we went out. So.
I just had one quick question about, since you were talking about the cases, and you said you started working on digitizing them as well, but they're not organized. So can you talk a little bit about that?
The cases, the court would start by